Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And as to the front pages, as usual, there's the Sunday Express in relentlessly optimistic mood. Brexit fools festive shopping bonanza, it says. The Mail on Sunday is carrying on its campaign about foreign aid being misspent. Pages of that inside. The big papers, as it were, the heavies, have the same thing basically on the front page. They've all got Strictly, and they've all got stories about the unions. In this case, a fight inside the main union about Len McCluskey and his role. That's the Observer, and then there's Strictly. There's the Sunday Telegraph. Pressure on Theresa May as the unions run rampant, it says. And a picture of the Queen and the Duke of Wales, Prince of Wales there, and Strict at the top, as usual. And then finally the Sunday Times. Rail union boss vows to topple Tories, he says. And there's that loyalty oath story that you saw in the news. The question, of course, is whether a loyalty oath about British values is itself a British value or not. But we are not going to start on the front pages, ladies and gentlemen, are we? We're going to start with Aleppo, which I think, John, you said is the most important story in the papers today.
Well, it clearly is, given the unfolding tragedy of Aleppo. And here we have on page 4 and onto page 5 in the Observer a harrowing account of what it's like to be in Aleppo. And it really struck me, I think it struck us all, Andrew, how extraordinary it is that as this unfolding tragedy happens in Aleppo, not a single newspaper has put Aleppo on its front pages. And a number of the papers have roundups of the year, including pictorial roundups. And this, for me, is the picture of the year in all the newspapers and magazines. And it's the wee boy who was rescued by the white helmets. These heroic people who run towards the barrel bombs in order to rescue civilians.
And he seemed completely out of it. He seemed to be utterly disorientated, to have no idea of what was going on or who he was when
exactly.
he was talked to.
And what's extraordinary is if you ever tweet a picture like this, and particularly this picture, which I did tweet earlier in the year, you get all these trolls who say that it's staged, that the little boy is a CIA plant. It's extraordinary.
There's a lot of Russian propaganda involved in the Aleppo story, isn't there?
False news.
Yeah, well, I think what struck me, as John said, the fact that it's not on the front pages, but I was particularly struck by this piece in the Observer, which talks about the stampede now almost to get out of the city, for the evacuees to get out. And we've heard so many horrors throughout the last months, years about Aleppo, but this actually had me in tears this morning as well, the struggle to actually leave the city. People started to run like they were mad. They lost luggage, money. I heard more than one lost a child, and I don't think any parent can read that without feeling that tug on the heartstrings about how just desperate it is now that it's over effectively for the civilians, at least we hope so, but now that dreadful struggle to actually leave to safety.
It's awful to see this going on our watch. We've all read about these kinds of scenes in history. And we have an international rules-based system at the UN, and it's being paralysed by Russian veto after Russian veto. So what can we do to bring together the world community so we can prevent the rule of the strongest always winning?
Well, we've got George Osborne coming on later on. He made a speech in the House of Commons this week saying that we had chosen to be bystanders in this, and to a certain extent he's right. The question,
there are no easy answers.
What would we have done if we had been there?
Exactly. There are no easy answers to this. And in the end, if you're going to have a rules-based international system, you have to have enforcement methods.
Right.
But the alternative to having a rules-based international system is much, much worse.
And
it's
of course
the rule of the fittest.
The last thing, of course, the people of
strongest.
Syria needed was more bombing.
Yeah.
And the rethink by some people seems to be that we should have been engaged in military action. And I'm not sure that was the answer.
Right. Well, let's move back. Sorry, let's move back to the front pages again, if we could. Angela, you've chosen the Sunday Telegraph story about the unions running rampant. Do you think they're running rampant? There's lots of strikes coming over Christmas.
Well, look, I think there are a couple of difficult strikes going on, but we know that the transport system is often closed down over Christmas for engineering works. I think the issue with Southern is an ongoing running sore. The franchise was actually given back to Southern without a proper competition. They've run a chronically bad service, and part of having a good service and gaining lots of public subsidy, let's face it, surely ought to have reasonable industrial relations.
If Labour was in power, do you think you'd take Southern back into public ownership?
Well, our policy was to take these franchises back into public ownership as they came due, but clearly the important thing at the moment is to have a decent service. People pay thousands of pounds for season tickets, and prior to the industrial action they've been left standing for trains that never turn up, and it means they can't get to work. And let's remember that these companies are milking billions of pounds of subsidy for providing this kind of service.
We're talking here about people who are, by any standards, not very well paid. Let's move to people who are very well paid. Suzanne Evans, I mentioned the aid story on the front of the Mail on Sunday, and you've chosen the spread inside.
Yeah. You know, the scenes we've seen in Aleppo, people expect the foreign aid budget to be spent on people in need, and in particular in times of emergency. But the Mail on Sunday has for a long time now been running a campaign showing how foreign aid money, which of course is set at about £1 billion a month in the UK, has been utterly abused. And I was very pleased to see that International Development Secretary Priti Patel has now actually been warning firms. She's put a freeze on certain aspects of the foreign aid budget, and she's saying that there's been a top-level investigation launched into how taxpayers' money is being spent, and what payments and expenses particularly are being taken by some of the fat cat charities who receive this aid money. And it is absolutely astonishing. You know, one organisation was given £10 million by DFID to tackle starvation, and yet their executive was paid more than £600,000 a year. Right. Another, Mary Stopes International, got £1 million over 2 years for their chief executive, and an annual bonus bigger than his basic salary.
Foreign aid is a good thing, and it actually stops states failing.
Nobody's saying it's not a good thing, Angela, but these salaries are unacceptable.
Children, it's helped to deal with mothers giving birth in areas where that's life.
Sure, but why do you need £1 million to do that?
And the strangest Christmas story, I think, political story of all, John, is the Christmas karaoke meltdown, as the Mail on... Is it the Mail on Sunday? I think it is.
Yes, it's surprising to see the Mail running an anti-Corbyn story. But there we have it. Apparently, there was a lovely Labour Party karaoke last night for Labour MPs. I wasn't invited to it.
Earlier in the week.
It was earlier in the week. And they started singing anti-Corbyn songs.
Which are... Things can only get better. Is that an anti-Corbyn song?
Can I say, I mean, I got a ticket for this event, but I was too ill to go, so I
You can sing it if you like,
I missed
Angela.
out. But I can tell you that there is always karaoke at the PLP Christmas do. It's where Ed Balls' talent for the limelight first became evident. But all I can say is that where Labour MPs gather, or where MPs and party members gather, things can only get better. It's often sung because it's our 1997 album.
And it's particularly true this year. You've had a terrible year in the Labour Party, 2016.
I think we'll be glad when this year's over, let's put it that way. I'm looking forward to New Year's Day.
And looking ahead, what about 2017 is going to get better? Diane Abbott said on the show last week that the polls would turn during the next 12 months. Do you agree with her?
Well, they've begun to turn. We have to hope that we can begin to remake our appeal to the electorate. It's no good considering that we have denying that we've had a bad year, but it's the same for social democratic parties across Europe. We have to talk about how we can ensure that people who work earn a reasonable income, so that all of the profit and the benefit doesn't go to those who own, because it's creating more insecure societies, more unequal societies, and that is not good for democracy.
In terms of the big Brexit argument, is your expectation that once the details of what we're going to do as we leave the EU come to the House of Commons, things get much tougher for the Tories? I
think they do. I think Brexit means Brexit is a kind of holding position while the Tory aeroplane circles looking for somewhere to land. I think as soon as Theresa May starts to define what she means by that, her party splinters in all different directions.
And John Nicholson, since we're looking back on 2016, a difficult year also for the SNP, because you have wanted to be part of the Brexit conversation with the rest of the EU all the way through, and you've been by and large kept out by the government. Is that going to change in 2017?
Well, you say that, but I think one of the interesting things is just how different the reaction that we get on the international stage is from the way it was during the independence referendum. Because during the independence referendum, we were the bad boys who wanted to break up a unitary state, and the European Union leaders made it very clear they didn't want to deal with us. That narrative has now changed. And
you're the ones who voted to stay.
We're the good Europeans who many of the European leaders want to reward.
But of course, 48% of the UK voted to stay. It wasn't nearly so big a result. And we've now got to think about how to bring the country back together.
We're going to talk about the 48% later on.
I think I'm a good European as well. I just don't like the European
Suzanne,
Union.
No, really?
Yeah.
UKIP obviously was part of the winning side in the referendum. That's been a big part of the story. But it leads to the question: what's the point of UKIP now? You've done what you wanted to achieve. You should all just disband and go home.
If I had even a pound for every time people say, "Oh, we've reached peak UKIP," that's it. I'd be a very rich woman, because people keep saying, you know, "Oh, UKIP reached its peak at the European elections. We reached its peak," and we just keep on getting better and better. And we've got a new leader now. We're looking to, in particular, target those people who don't recognise the Labour Party anymore. Good, decent, working-class people in this country who don't see in Jeremy Corbyn the way forward for them under Labour. So I think we've got a great future ahead.
We're going to have to wrap up in a moment, but the political awards of the year in the Sunday Times for 2016, John.
They are extraordinary, the political awards. Angela features here in them. You'll be glad to see there she is there for the press conference. The politician of the year is Theresa May. But one of the stories that is not mentioned in this, which perhaps we can mention, is the Jo Cox single, which politicians of all parties are supporting. And here we have it on the BBC website. All our friends and colleagues from MP4.
Good cause.
It's a very good cause. And the Rolling Stones have just announced that they are going to, hope you can see that okay, the Rolling Stones have just announced that they're going to waive their royalties for the Jo Cox single.
Well, good for them.
It's at 24 in the charts at the moment, so we want it to be at 1.
Good for them. Okay, just before we wrap, one of the pictures of the year, of course, there's Nigel Farage and Trump, and there is possibly the scariest picture of the year.
All I can say is we've
two
got Nigel
unhappy
Farage and Trump there. He's sort of trying to become the sort of independent ambassador, even though the government have disowned him, and he doesn't represent the country. He stood for election 7 times to Parliament and never succeeded.
More on that coming up. But
here we go. We've started discussing the papers already. That's a photograph of the Queen and Prince Charles. We're going to look through them now. I'm joined by the documentary filmmaker Jenny Kleeman, the businesswoman Margaret Mountford, and the former politician David Mellor. Very good morning to you all. Well, we might glimpse that photograph as we wade through the papers. But Jenny, start us off with this on the front of the Sunday Times. This after the report into integration in the UK, a loyalty oath for public office holders.
Yes, Sajid Javid has suggested, he's written a comment piece that's in the Sunday Times, and in it he has suggested that everyone who has public office in the UK should be made to swear an oath. And this oath would include tolerating the views of others, even if you disagree with them, believing in freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Oh dear.
Why do you say that, Jenny? Why, oh dear.
Well, I don't know if you've ever gone to America and you have to sign the visa waiver and you have to say that you're, one of the questions is, are you here to commit genocide? Are you here to abduct an American child?
Purpose
and you
of
think,
visit,
you think if you were there to commit genocide, would you say, oh yes, I am? And I don't think these things make any difference at all. They're a piece of theatre to reassure the host country rather than stopping anything at all. I think values come from lived experience, not from swearing oaths. We do want people, all people who live in this country, and not just people who hold public office, to share in British values, but making them swear an oath isn't going to do it.
It has to come from within, really. Right? What do you think, Margaret? I mean, you mentioned the United States, but there's so many other things about being an American citizen which do involve those public displays of fealty to the country.
Yes, which we don't have. But I think he has highlighted an issue. This isn't the way to deal with it. This was paying lip service to something. Never works. But there is an issue that when you get local authorities spending public money on organisations and individuals that are speaking up for the opposite of what are British values, that shouldn't be allowed out. This isn't the way to stop that by people saying, oh yes, I support this, that and the other. Yeah. But there is an issue behind it.
Which is?
Which is that I think that British values are very important, and that if people will come to live in this country because of the values we have here, and we need to uphold them and be seen to uphold them. And local, on the next page of the article, it points out about one local authority funding 2 organisations who exist to prove that ISIL or ISIS is not a threat and it isn't a terrorist organisation, and that should not be receiving public funding. This isn't the way
So
to
therefore,
get
I mean,
at that.
as we discussed here, okay, perhaps a drop in the ocean, David, but part of the overall process, as Margaret is talking about, that shouldn't be derived.
I agree with Margaret. I also love that question they used to have about whether you were there to subvert the Constitution of the United States, and someone wrote sole purpose of visit and was arrested.
Yes, well, of course. Yeah.
But the point is, America, I think, does patriotism better than we do. We're always don't want patriotism, and indeed, there's no reason why people should have to be, breast-beatingly patriotic. But I do think we have made a mistake in allowing people to come into our country and become British citizens who make no real concessions to being British at all. And there are parts of this country now where it's quite difficult to imagine that there's any shared values at all.
Right, let's stay with shared values, David, because I want to stay with you and this thorny issue of the Christmas of discontent, winter of discontent. Are these shared British values then the right to strike?
Well, I come from a trade union background, but my grandfathers were both trade unions, so was my father. But I grew away from the trade unions. I think a lot of us did of that generation, because the trade unions seemed to be more about politicking than about doing good for working people. And I think the Observer's headline suggests that Len McCluskey is going to be challenged by one of his senior executives, Gerard Coyne, on the basis it's 4 years, according to Coyne, since McCluskey appeared in public supporting an industrial case for the Unite Union. But of course he's been there backing up Corbyn, and before that he was backing up Miliband. And the question then is, pressure on May, this is Sunday Telegraph, has unions
this
run
is for some
rampant?
more new legislation.
Yes, because, no one, I believe a million impossible things for breakfast, or whatever it was Lewis Carroll's line, but at the end of it all, the fact that there's a railway strike affecting a lot of the southeast, the fact that there is going to be strikes affecting British Airways, the fact that there's a strike affecting the post office, no one's telling me this isn't coordinated. And one has to remember, the unions are not what they were. None of us are what we were. There are now 6.5 million trades unionists in this country out of a workforce of 31 million. Why should they be allowed to hold us to ransom?
Okay, Margaret, more legislation perhaps to say, for instance, on the railways, that at the very least they've got to run a skeleton service.
Yes, I think every dog is his day, and the unions have had theirs, frankly. And I think there is a role for unions to represent individuals when they need it, if they're unfairly dismissed or they're suffering harassment or discrimination at work, that sort of thing. But this mass disruption of public infrastructure should not be allowed, and there should certainly be much higher proportions of membership who have to vote and who have to vote for action across the board, I think. But this is shocking. People's livelihoods are being lost, and these train drivers are not on low wages.
The problem is, though, I understand the arguments. Jenny, you come in on this because then if you say, well, you have to work, and they say we don't want to work, then we're going back 100, 150 years. We get to lockouts, to sacking people, to bringing in scab labour.
Clearly, the answer lies in not getting to this point where relations are so bad that it comes to all of this. There needs to be better negotiation. There needs to be... Also, people need to be more realistic, I think, about what they're asking for and what's possible. As a self-employed person, I feel like I have absolutely no rights at all and I have no sympathy. But I do understand why these people are striking. It just shouldn't come to such a crunch point that you get drivers who will refuse to drive.
Well, I don't understand why they're striking over this so-called safety issue. Apparently, there's only one person in the last decade who has been injured getting on and off a train, and that was on a train that had a guard.
It's always a safety issue.
So what would you say... No, David Mellor, what would you say to Theresa May then? Because apparently Number 10 is being hesitant about this. There are plenty on the back benches of the Conservative Party saying, right, you've got public support for this, certainly in the southeastern areas that have been affected. Well, now's the chance to do something.
I don't want to breach the Official Secrets Act, but the description of Theresa May as a new Margaret Thatcher is about as wide of the mark as it can possibly be. For all her many faults, and I was the youngest minister for 4 years, and she treated me with even more disrespect than my mother did. But, Margaret Thatcher knew what she wanted to do and did it. I don't think Theresa May does know what she wants to do, which is why her advisors appear to be the ones that create the headlines. And I think she's sitting there and she's infirm of purpose. But she needs to seize the initiative, and the main initiative she needs to seize is to have a general election. election, get herself a mandate. Because the stupid thing about these trade unionists is this, you know, I don't know whether they get their brains from the frozen pea section of supermarkets. Why are they doing this? If the government is pushed too far, are the public really going to elect Corbyn? It's just exactly like the winter of discontent. It's exactly like the winter of discontent, where a Labour government was brought down and destroyed.
Jenny, this is about workers' rights. The next story you've got also in the Times, and it's about the massive Amazon facing a grilling, this time about the issue of overtime.
Yes, well, Amazon, this is a story that Sunday Times, is some investigation that the Sunday Times did last week, where they looked at bad conditions in Amazon warehouses, and that applicants being, denied sick leave even if they had legitimate letters. The reason why I picked this story is because I feel that we shouldn't be surprised that this is what's going on in warehouses. It's not just Amazon. You know, this week alone we've had stories about Sports Direct, JD Sports. There have been stories about ASOS, and the fact is, if we are going to buy things online very, very cheaply, we have to accept that the people who are working behind the scenes are not being paid very much. And when you're buying things online, you're just looking for the cheapest price. You're comparing different sites for the cheapest price. This is what you get. And we now have a culture in this country of these kinds of warehouses, which are quite often located in very impoverished parts of the country. And this is just how our retail sector works.
I mean, it kind of joins up with dimensions of the discussion we just had, doesn't it?
Yes.
This is about workers' rights.
It is. And
the role of trade unions in protecting them.
And if we have a problem in people's rights being ignored, we need to be prepared to pay slightly more for things. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say, but we need to be prepared to pay slightly more so that people have better working conditions.
I think that's one of those areas, though, where people would agree with that, and they tick the box if they're surveyed, but then when they're online they go, oh look, it's cheaper.
Yeah, we'll go for the cheapest one.
And the behaviour is different than from the view expressed. Margaret, your next story is this thorny issue of Northern Ireland and the legacy of the Troubles. 4 IRA members is the story who killed my father deserve to be shot. This is in the Telegraph.
Yes, and this is the daughter of someone who was shot by the IRA, saying that whoever killed him deserved, acted properly and should not be prosecuted now. And this is because over 44 years after the event, the so-called historical inquiry statements, there's a warning there, isn't there? Historical inquiry, have reopened a case which has been closed twice in the past against 2 soldiers who are now 67 and 65 for taking action and shooting this person who shot in the leg and bled to death in 1971. And we've had a lot of publicity over terrorists, or potentially terrorists, I'm careful, who had letters of comfort from the authorities and then could not be prosecuted as a result of the letters of comfort. These soldiers were given letters of comfort, but there appears to be 2 different laws going on, one for terrorists of all sides, and the other for the armed forces.
Well, I mean, it goes for so many conflicts, doesn't it? I mean, let's draw parallels, many huge differences, of course, with, for instance, South Africa, where they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission there. Should that have been, David, in your view, should that mean something that flowed on from the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, having been in the cabinet room at number 10 when 2 IRA mortar bombs arrived in the garden, I'm rather pleased that we don't have to go through that anymore. But if we're going to shut away the past, and a lot of people who are involved in that are now holding public office in Northern Ireland, and for my part, I swallow hard about some of them, but I say it's better than what we had before. But, you know, who would advise their child or grandchild to go and serve in the British forces when you will find yourself held to account for doing things in the agony of the moment? And, what is so awful, it's this ghastly sense I have of the impotence of politicians. I mean, Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, keeps saying that that's not going to happen. Theresa May keeps saying that, and yet it happens, and it keeps on going on.
Jenny, pawn and consent classes in all schools. Tell us about it, and tell us if you agree or disagree.
Well, pawn and consent classes are going to be rolled out. I'm just trying to find it. I'm going to look at yours, Margaret. Are going to be made compulsory in all schools. At the moment, free schools and academies, and most religious schools are free schools and academies, have the option to opt out of these classes. I think all kids need to be educated on this, because basically we shouldn't kid ourselves that kids don't have access to it. However, if you want your children to be safe online or to not have their innocence stolen by being exposed to this stuff very young, you have to talk to them. You can't leave it up to the school. And there's far too much, we'll just
so many
let the
other
school
areas,
do it.
doesn't it?
Unfortunately, if you want to protect your kids, that begins at home and not at school.
I'm upping the story count. We've got 2 more to go. Margaret, you've got a cartoon, haven't you?
I've got
This issue of police officers
Yes, I've got a
perhaps going to
cartoon.
need a degree.
Of a police officer on the beat saying, proceeding in an easterly direction, and I should know I've got a geography degree. And I think it shows the nonsense of, and we're going this way with everything, in making you have to have a degree in order to do this. And I can see that there are jobs that you need to have degrees for and other jobs that you don't. And frankly, to be a policeman on the beat who spots somebody breaking into a house and apprehends them, that's what you want, rather than somebody who can write a very fluent essay about what they've seen.
And given it's the last show, and every time David's been on in the past, I've prevented him from doing this. Here you go, David. That's an Arsenal fan. Over to you.
11 in a row.
Chelsea.
What answer does Arsenal have for this? Are they going to beat Manchester City
I'm not getting
this
involved in
afternoon?
any discussion.
No,
but
actually,
Chelsea
anybody else
haven't
care?
they been doing well? What do you want to tell
No,
us?
I mean, but
But
the point is, it does matter who the manager is. And this Conte, who we all think is wonderful, because he seems to sort of be able to get the best out of these chaps. Because the assumption always is, if you pay these people 100,000 a week, you'll get the best out of them. It doesn't happen that way. And I mean, it's just exhilarating. I mean, I'm probably getting sad now. As I get depressed by the world, I react against it, and I take refuge reading endless accounts of Chelsea's 11th win this morning before
Well,
I
I'm not
come
going to make
on
this
here.
conversation between you and me. But Margaret, what about the 3-4-3 system that Mr. Conte
I feel sorry for football fans because they're only people who have any loyalty to these clubs whatever. There's grossly overpaid players, grossly overpaid managers, and it's the poor saps of the fans who are supporting that. So I feel sorry for both.
But we feel good. At the
I'm
moment.
very
Well,
glad
you
you
do.
do.
I don't.
Yeah. Over the moon, but not yet.
I'm
Sick
in
as
the
a parrot.
stats. Okay. Well, listen, very good to see you all. Thank you very much indeed for taking us through the last paper review on Murnaghan. Feel honoured. I do.
I feel very honoured.
I feel honoured too.
Very good to see you.
Bye.
I'm still here for an hour and a bit. Now, there it goes without saying, in UK politics, 2016 will go down in history as the year of Brexit. But a lot else happened too, some of it flowing from that. The replacement of David Cameron as Prime Minister with Theresa May, the Labour rebellion, the apparent end of years of austerity and more. I'm joined by UKIP's Suzanne Evans, the former Shadow Europe Minister, Pat McFadden, and the Economist magazine's senior editor, Anne McElvoy. Let's start quickly because we've got so much to discuss. Brexit. I said a lot else flowed from there. David Cameron, who would have thought a year ago now that he wouldn't even be an MP?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, looking at what, how you kicked off there, Dermot, that we all thought that David Cameron, one way or the other, would still be in post at the end of the year, and he isn't. He has the right to roam and do all the things he wanted to do, couldn't do when he was Prime Minister, but he's out of office. I think that was a bitter blow to him. And at the same time, Jeremy Corbyn, many people would have thought might not have made it through the year, survived that rebellion as Labour leader.
OK, well, Brexit brings in Suzanne, of course. I mean, still celebrating.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I remember that morning, Dermot, when you actually interviewed me the day after the referendum
So
in the
many
little
interviews,
box that we had
Yeah.
you had on College Green. But what an incredible morning! Big businesses, big politics. Nobody expected Leave to win, but all those people who for years have suffered as a result of European Union politics finally got the chance to make their voice heard. And there we go. We are leaving the EU. And it's interesting, talking about David Cameron, I among, like many people I'm sure, was delighted to see David Cameron leave office. But I always have to remember him too as the Prime Minister that gave us the referendum.
Well, so remembering him fondly for that. Pat, do you remember him fondly for that, or is it the other way?
No, I
Shouldn't
don't.
have done it.
Brexit is the biggest decision in a way that the country's made since the Second World War, and having made the decision, I think 2017 and maybe many years on from that will be about all the questions that arise from that referendum decision. I think for David Cameron, this was the gamble that failed. He rolled the dice, this blew back on him. He was the first Tory leader to win a majority in Parliament for 23 years, and then a year later was out of a job. And the thing that strikes me about his decision-making on this was, I don't believe it was ever because he sat down and thought, this is the best thing for the country. I think this was more for him about managing divisions in the Tory party, fending off the threat of UKIP
Absolutely
and
right.
so on.
I think you're right.
And it blew back on him in the most spectacular way.
Suzanne agreeing with that.
Yeah,
but-
I do agree. I think David Cameron promised the referendum for all the wrong reasons. However, it turned out, I firmly believe, it will be proven to be the right decision. And although he might not have intended it to be the best thing to happen for the country, I think that's what it's going to
But
prove
I mean,
to
you
be.
know, what the one is we're hearing there flowing from the other, the 2015 general election victory, and indeed before that winning the Scottish independence referendum the year before that, gave David Cameron a kind of template, and George Osborne shouldn't be left out of this as well, that it was the economy stupid. We've had George Osborne doing the rounds recently saying, we thought it was all about the economy, but now it's more than that.
Yes, it's interesting how they almost went out of their way to miss the point on that one, I think. And I know that many people are wiser after the event, that probably includes me. But I do think that there was if you looked at that campaign and there's sort of, basically the groundswell of opinion, and one of the things everyone said, well, I've talked to people in my family, particularly outside London, or I've been back to where I went to school, or I've had my great Auntie Betty around, and gosh, they're going to vote Brexit. And often it was not because they'd sat there and gone through the economic figures, and then there was a lot of hoo-ha about who had told more lies. In fact, both sides had told such a lot of whoppers by the end that we were pretty lost. But people were voting on something else, and now we have the job in politics. And Suzanne says she's celebrating. I'm not so sure there is so much to celebrate. We have the job of sorting out what we deliver that puts that mood right again.
And what you said there about the whoppers, I'm not going to revisit any of the claims made there, but apart from the one that it was meant to be saving us money, and we hear things like 50 to 60 billion pounds of liabilities to leave the club.
That's not going to happen. And part of the problem with the whoppers told in the EU referendum campaign was that
still
they were
being
all
told.
coming from the Remain side. Project
don't
Fear,
start,
World War III.
Suzanne.
Well, you started it
350
actually,
million.
not me, Dermot. But interesting, talking about the economy, people saying it was about the economy. Well, I think people looked at Cameron and Osborne and they saw how badly they'd managed the economy. We have record national debt, a deficit that's still running at 19 billion. We've got the housing crisis,
that's not going
the
away
energy
anytime
crisis,
soon after
the
Brexit,
banking
Suzanne.
crisis, and people looked at them and thought, well, why are these people talking to us about the economy? Because they have absolutely wrecked our economy.
Okay, well, let's move it on to the economy. And this, again, a year ago, this was the issue we were told was trumped, excuse that word, all others, that it was all about austerity, the size of the deficit, the growing size of the debt, that was going to swamp us. Now we're told, I mean, it's almost as if Theresa May and her Chancellor have adopted, well, Ed Miliband's programme, to say the least. We can borrow more, we can mitigate the effect of...
Well, austerity is the policy that seems to never end. We've had these 5-year targets and rules which are constantly broken. And one of the big issues arising from the Brexit vote is whether that will continue longer or not. At the moment, the OBR is saying this is going to cost us an extra 59 billion in borrowing. Who knows whether that will be right or not, but they are factoring in a cost to this in future years. But I think the big political change this year is the one that you touched on with Anne a minute ago. It is that, I was brought up in a way politically that the economy would be the dominant factor in any election, and you'd have an argument about tax and spend and cuts and so on. This time, voters were looking at those economic warnings and either not believing them or saying we actually care about something different here.
Yes, I mean, there are other surveys that
so
say
I think
some people were aware there may be a cost.
That's
for
sovereignty,
politics
identity,
here.
but also immigration, which we
Some of those issues, and I think in a constituency like mine in Wolverhampton, there's a big sense of loss about industrial change, which isn't just economic. Sometimes it's about purpose and pride and what a city does for a living. And I think we've got to respond to that sense of loss as well as talking about...
Let me ask you this, Anne, first of all, and we come back to you, Pat and Suzanne. Jeremy Corbyn, we're hearing he's going to be reprogrammed, repackaged, I'm not sure what it is, but he's going to be represented to the British public as a populist on the basis that if he does some of the things that Pat is saying, he might have more appeal.
I think there is something quite amusing about having to relaunch as a populist. I mean, it's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? I mean, you either are one or you're not. If you're not like... It also reminds me that some people manage to be unpopular populists. I think, from Jeremy Corbyn's point of view, he has rather belatedly, but he's seen seeing where this is going, that being the mainstream politician who grinds away at the figures, Pat was just, evoking that for us, is not going to do the job for him. And there was something quite theoretical about the approach of the Corbynites. It's always a bit like being in a sort of not very good university seminar. And I think what they really want to do now is show that they can get out of this seminar, or get out of the isms, if you like, and their sort of endless kind of attempts to revisit bits of quite tired bits of left-wing dogma. Whether they can do it with that cast of characters, I mean, certainly someone like Diane Abbott, I'm sure, can rebrand as a populist. She sort of is. But whether they can do it with, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, well,
but of course that's what you're after. That's where UKIP sees the growth coming, don't you?
Well,
we've heard it from Paul Nuttall, and we heard it from
yeah.
you during the leadership campaign as well. That there's a lot of Labour voters there who feel absolutely unconnected to the party now for UKIP to go for.
That's right. And talking about populism, what is the most popular thing in this country? It's the monarchy. And we've just had Diane Abbott on your I was going to say on your throne then, on your programme, saying that, she couldn't swear an allegiance to the Queen. Jeremy Corbyn comes across as this deeply anti-British character in many ways, who won't sing the national anthem, who doesn't support the monarchy, wouldn't bow on bended knee, so we're told, before the Queen and Privy Council.
But that's not going to do it. That's not going to do it for UKIP, though, is it? I mean, that's not going to rebrand you as the official opposition.
Well, I know it's. I think there's a lot more than that. Obviously, UKIP is talking about the issues about immigration, the issues about Islamist extremism that the Labour Party simply doesn't want to tackle. So it's far bigger than that. But as Anne said, you can't just say Jeremy Corbyn is now going to be a populist and suddenly expect the Labour Party to drag itself back from the 1970s idea it's stuck in.
An opportunity for Labour to rebuild?
I would make 2 points about this. First of all, leadership is about responsibility. And we've had very poor poll ratings for quite some time now. And I think it's dawning on Mr. Corbyn and his team that they've got to take responsibility for this. There's no point in blaming someone else for this. The buck stops with you as a leader. But when it comes to relaunches, the thing that strikes me is rebranding isn't enough. People see through that instantly. A successful change in perception of any political party can only come about when there's really deep-rooted change. You have to have a really fearless look at policy, nothing off the table, what's ruled in, what's ruled out, how can you speak to new circumstances? If the Labour Party can do that, it has a chance to get back in the game. But a simple rebranding, I'm afraid, won't be enough.
Last thoughts, Anne, about Theresa May. Make or break year for her?
Make or break, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and not even certain whether she hits her self-imposed deadline of triggering Article 50,
really?
Getting us. Well, I think that she desperately wants to do it, but you see, she's not getting an awful lot of help to do it on good terms. You saw the cold shoulder she got. She didn't exactly get a Christmas party warm-up, did she, at the recent summit? I think that the extent to which, this is something I think also that UKIP have badly underestimated, the extent to which we are going to get no help to get out of the EU on good terms is coming home to haunt Theresa May. She's a practical person. She doesn't want to trigger something before there is any sort of deal or transitional deal in place. That is a big problem for her and for the country.
I'll just say very quickly,
we shall see.
We will get a lot of help from the rest of the world.
Well, we shall see, but you won't see it on this programme because we won't be here. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, on the valedictory Murnaghan show. As ever, if you've missed any of today's interviews, you can catch them online or on our podcast. But that's it for good. No more Murnaghan. In the new year, you can find me presenting Sky News tonight at 7 p.m. on weekday evenings. Now then, from the election of President Trump-elect Trump, to the Syrian civil war, the fall of Aleppo and the migration crisis, this has been an unprecedented year for foreign affairs. So we're going to take a look back at 2016 now with the help of the economist and one-time presidential advisor, Dr. Pippa Malmgren, the former Lib Dem leader, Lord Ming Campbell, and the writer and Russian expert, Mary Dejevsky. We'll have a look at Ming Campbell. There he is. Good to see you. What I'm going to do now is I want to bring up a grid. No prizes for guessing who we're going to have on it, just to kind of jog our memories about some of the significant players in this extraordinary year as I've described. And, well, let's start with you, Pippa. You pick one of them and let's discuss it. Of course, they're all kind of joined up as well. No odd ones out here.
Well, I have to say, so Renzi, no one's going to remember very shortly.
Renzi, bottom right, former Italian Prime Minister.
That'll be like a pop quiz question. Can you remember? And Putin and Trump are going to be there next year.
Okay.
Well, they will persist.
So hold on, you're starting with Renzi, is this it?
I'm just saying Renzi is we're going to forget.
Okay.
And Putin and Trump we're not going to forget.
Okay, it's not another one out, right? But I mean, what this all tells us is it's been a year, and you know, it's very broad term, and we've seen it with the Brexit vote as well when we do our domestic discussion. Populism.
Yes. Populism is here to stay, in my opinion, for some years. This will not just go away with the wave of a hand. And the pain that is causing populism is persisting. I mean, they say the price of a Christmas dinner in the UK is up 14% year on year. So even though official inflation looks flat, people are feeling discomfort from a higher cost of living, from uncertainty about their economic future. That gives you populism. So I think this is going to persist. It'll persist in the US as well, less so because our economy is a little bit stronger, to be honest. Foreign policy is going to be the big issue. And we have stress now between Putin and Trump on a number of different fronts, and between the US and China, where the Chinese have just taken one of our drones.
We didn't manage to get the Chinese on there. That was a bit of an oversight there. But Mary, Putin and Trump, I mean, interesting people there saying, you know, tension between them. Well, everyone's thinking, given what went on during the course of the election campaign, that it's, well, let's say not sweetness and light, but it's going to be a different relationship.
Well, I think that the extent to which Trump sort of idolizes Putin, which was one of the suggestions here, was actually totally wrong. I think Trump thinks that he can do business with Putin, and I think he may be right. There are ways in which the pair of them are quite similar character-wise, and if you think back, the foreign leader that Putin used to get on with best was Berlusconi. And I think Donald Trump has certain things in common with Berlusconi as being sort of two big characters, not necessarily politicians in the sort of traditional sense. And so you look at Trump and Putin and you think they could get on really, really well. They could change things actually for the better in terms of the feelings between them and things that can come out of it, or it could be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, so things that might change then, if there is a better relationship and they do cut deals, then, I mean, in terms of our own country, I can imagine Donald Trump saying to President Putin, for instance, look, we know you're never going to give back the Crimea. You know, that's the reality of the world. We're not going to invade. We're not going to launch NATO attacks against you. We'll have to give up on that. And indeed, when it comes to Syria as well, you know, you have been on what seems to be the winning side at the moment. We have continually failed to intervene, and we're not getting involved.
Just one thing. Trump and Putin still there at the end of next year. Assad, who would have believed that at the beginning of this year?
Or 2 or 3 or 4 years ago.
That Assad would have survived. I think the difficulty is going to come because I believe that Putin's going to want a sphere of influence. And of course, Trump and some of the things he said in the course of the presidential election campaign about NATO being obsolete, suggesting that the Article 5 obligation, which means an attack on one is an attack on all, might no longer be appropriate. I tell you what that's done. It's sent fear and trembling through the Baltic states and indeed Poland as well. And if what happens is there is some kind of deal struck between them, then Europe, I think, will be the loser in that deal. And there will be a great sense of loss of security, loss of confidence. Now, I don't think America will abandon Europe altogether. Too many interests. Actually, it's a very good jumping off place for the Middle East, because, of course, they have bases that they can use there. But if a deal is going to be done with Putin, you can be certain that Putin will want to have the influence over Europe. It takes us back to Gorbachev, a new structure for defense from the Atlantic to the Urals. The point is, Gorbachev wanted that on a kind of basis of equality. Putin wants it on the basis of dominance.
It's interesting what you said. I mean, do you go along with that, Pippa, that he might follow through, Donald Trump, on what he has said about NATO, and in particular, you know, he doesn't feel those that aren't paying enough, they should actually get the full protection. Perhaps the Baltics could be the next flashpoint.
Well, I think it's very noisy in the Baltics, let's put it that way. There are a lot of events occurring there that are worth paying attention to. But I agree, Donald Trump is a deal maker, and they both have a deal-making quality about them. What I fear is that, I worked for George W. Bush, who met Putin and said, I've looked the guy in the eyes, I can do business with him, and then it turned out not so much. And I wonder whether Trump says, listen, you have Crimea, Ukraine, we don't want it, you do Syria, and then he thinks that's it. And then actually, Russia's view is, oh, great, we got two, let's see what else we can get. Sure. And we begin a process a little bit like during the old Cold War, where there's a jockeying, a competition for influence in different places. And so in that sense, we're at the beginning of a process, not near the end.
And as you're saying, I mean, that's going to worry Europe, but though, could that not then make Europe, perhaps without the United Kingdom, pull closer together militarily, Mary?
Well, I think we're all seeing that already to an extent, because almost the moment the Brexit vote was passed, we had the Europeans, especially Germany and France, talking about the possibility of a European army, which we seem to have had off the agenda. And then the British came out and said, well, we're going to veto that, even though actually we don't have a veto anymore. So I think it actually would be... I think it would make a lot of sense for the Europeans to get together in the defence sphere as well as everything else, especially
talk more about Europe. Pippi, you want to come in?
Trump is absolutely right to say the Europeans should be spending more on defence. NATO has got this minimum of 2% of GDP. It's actually not enough for the United Kingdom. And the problem is that with the United Kingdom being detached from Europe, then all of this will have to be done through NATO. And if Trump, I've been repeating myself, if Trump is not wholly committed to NATO, then that's going to leave a big gap.
And that will be tested.
Of course. And remember this, Putin, we act in a rules-based system. Putin doesn't believe in the rules.
But the key here is technology. The key is technology. All of this will be about space, cyberspace, the high seas, data collection. This is not about boots on the ground type of spending. Yeah. That's why the drone issue between the US and China is so important, because it's really all about data collection in international territorial waters. Will we see that same kind of issue arising in Europe? I suspect we will.
Mark Tarkard, I need to ask about Europe, though, because that's why we had Matteo Renzi there. Come in on this. We've got the elections coming up, in particular in France and Germany, other countries. What's your guess on this wave of populism?
Well, Marine Le Pen will obviously be in the last two in France. I'm in no doubt about that. The question is whether or not the rather surprise figure who's emerged as an alternative, Ballon, I think his name is, will be able to beat her. I would have thought that that was likely, because I think, although it's a little more difficult, because if he'd been more centrist, then the socialists might have been more inclined to vote for him. The fact is, he's an avowed Thatcherite. Indeed, he regards Mrs. Thatcher as being one of his heroines. But I still believe that France will not move away from or into the Marine Le Pen country. But don't forget Holland, where Wilders and the Freedom Party are making moves. Alternative for Deutschland. The note that Angela Merkel's going to have a problem on her hand. Right across Europe, the right, and it's a populist right.
All right, Francois Fillon. The other views, you had it there, both.
Francois Fillon, yes, married to a Welsh woman, which would look good for the détente if the Brits were staying in the European Union, which of course they're not, so there's a problem there. But I actually think that Francois Fillon makes a very, very plausible candidate. And I'm not even entirely sure that Marine Le Pen will get into the second round. I think there is an interesting question here about how far France has actually almost been inoculated against the National Front because it's been around so long, because it's part of the furniture. It's not really part of the new wave of populism. So I'm not sure, and I just wonder whether there might not be a resurgence of the left in France, not to take the presidency, but just to alter the complexion of French politics.
But also, I mean, populism can take many forms as well, can't it? I mean, what would
Yeah.
Donald Trump's attitude be towards Marine Le Pen? Would he encourage that kind of thing?
You know, well, it's rather clear he will get along with anyone who says they're for radical change. And any radical change that works in favor of the general public, he's going to say that. Now, this is arguable in France because the French are going to say, no, we like our 40-hour work week and we want to keep our economic conditions. But the fact is, The voters in France are telling you they're moving away from that model. So, and across Europe, everybody's basically saying the system as it stands is not delivering on the promises. And I think the more headlines we get, for example, about, say, Italian banks that have lost 98% of their share price, but the government somehow tries to find billions for them, but there's nothing for the 20 to 40-year-olds who are in virtually lifetime unemployment. The more we're going to see resistance against the old and push for something new.
There's a very important point to make here, and it's this. If all the promises which are now invested in the populists are not delivered, then what then? And if you listen to what Trump has to say, if you listen to what Brexiteers have to say in this country, it's a land of milk and honey on the other side. The fact of the matter is that as far as Britain's concerned, the economy is a problem. Of that there is no doubt, as evidenced by the autumn statement which the Chancellor of the Exchequer produced. These issues are not going to go away simply because you get rid of the old order.
Maybe the year of reckoning. I wanted to ask, we got a SAD up there, of course, and you started with it, Ming, there. You think it'd survive another year? I'm just reading here on the issue of Aleppo. And what cities will we be talking about in a year's time, in 3 months' time? Aleppo, more buses going in to start these evacuations, which seem to be stop-start, and many problems there. We've been reading today, haven't we, about buses being stopped once they get out of view and people being taken off them and shot. What's your view in the way Syria goes? More of the same?
It's hard to see anything different. As long as Assad is able to have the Russian Air Force effectively doing his business for him, in those circumstances, none of the so-called rebels has really got a chance. You may get parity on the ground, but if you haven't got air cover, then you're bound to be in second position. And I think the issue really will turn into one, not so much what Assad is trying to do, but what is happening from the Iranian militias who are now part of this. And indeed the people who are saying, well, actually, Aleppo falling to the Syrians a lot better than if it falls to these Iranian militias who may be determined to wreak vengeance based as much on religion as on anything else.
And Mary, in terms of developments there, at least, I mean, do you see more inroads being made in Iraq and Syria into IS, into Islamic State?
Well, at the moment it looks as though the trend is in that direction. But I think when we're talking specifically about Russian influence and what the Russians intend, say, for Syria and against IS, I think their priority in all this has been holding Syria together to try and stop Syria descending into the sort of mess that Iraq, Libya was. And I think in some ways it sees it as a test to see whether Russian assistance can actually work out something better than the West managed to achieve elsewhere. And so I think that there's a big test for Russia, and it's not just about sort of whether some sort of order comes to Syria.
Just like we're nearly out of time, Pippin. Just your last one.
But there are much bigger issues. All of the borders in the Middle East are disintegrating before our eyes. We have regional superpower conflict between Saudi and Iran. So this is one piece of a very tricky puzzle.
Pippa, Mary, Ming, very good to see you. Thank you all very much indeed for your take on what lies ahead on the foreign affairs front.